Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another week. Good morning. Welcome to another week of Mr. Businessman. It feels like we've been doing this a hell of a long time now, doesn't it? It does. I feel like I should have, reached 100 million subscribers and, got one of those plaques for my wall. That this has a YouTube thing on. That would be amazing, though. I'd love that. I have a family member who has one of those plaques. Which is I'm very, very envious of. The one I mean. When you get a certain amount of subscribers on YouTube, they give you like a plaque thing that's like a YouTube emblem, but like in silver or gold or platinum. I think it works like that anyway. But it's very cool, and it says the channel name on it, and it says your first. I think it's 1 million. Oh no, can it be? It might be 100,000. Anyway. That'd be good, wouldn't it? I mean, what am I on now? 68 or something like that. So a bit of a way to go. And I don't really think this is mass market enough to really warrant that kind of stuff. But hey, you never know. Apologies for starting at 5 past as well. You know what I did? I actually went downstairs and I reset the internet. So I was actually ready. I was ready to come on at literally at about 5 to, which is unusual because I'm usually messing around with stuff. Right up until the dot, but today I was ready, but I went downstairs and reset the internet. So hopefully we're gonna have a nice crisp, 3 meg connection today. Upload speeds of no dropped frames, no me going or anything like that. Well, there might be some of me going, but not. It won't be because of this. Today is Boris Day as well, isn't it? Congratulations, everyone. We didn't think we'd make it, but welcome to Boris Day. Boris Johnson's back in office, or I don't know if he ever left, but he's back in office today. So we can all dance around the room. He's like a war hero, isn't he? He's like a war hero. So we'll be talking a little bit about him later on, anyway, in the news section of the thing. We're going to be talking about productivity and operations today and capacity utilization. So I hope you are ready, my cool cats, for some craziness of the next 45 minutes to an hour, because this is really, really crazy stuff, this productivity and capacity utilization, enough to get you up at 10 a.m. on a Monday. It is Monday, isn't it? It's still difficult to keep track of the days, isn't it? But anyway, before we start chatting, let's get straight into it. So welcome, productivity, operations. We're going to have a little look at operations now, sort of a couple of things. And as I said, I know that there's a couple of things I'm sort of hopping all over the spec a little bit, but don't worry, we will cover everything eventually. But it's just harder to film some of these than it is the others. So we're getting the easy ones out of the way first, and then I'll mess around with the other ones to begin with. All right. So let's go over here. Okay, let's get into it. So let's have a look at the learning objectives. First of all, explain what is meant by productivity, understand ways of measuring productivity, explain the ways in which productivity can be increased, evaluate the importance and impact of productivity for a business and its stakeholders, explain the concept of capacity utilization, calculate and interpret capacity utilization, evaluate the concept of capacity utilization for a business and its stakeholders. So we've got the same thing as we always have, haven't we? Explain, evaluate, analyze. We've got those core, AO1 to AO4 requirements of anything that you would have on a different topic. So if you noticed, it seems to be very similar every time we go to a different topic. We seem to be saying the same thing. Yeah, well, we do, because it's always going to ask you the same kind of skills. What the thing is, can we analyze it, and can we understand it and evaluate it and apply it to stakeholders as well, and see how it affects them. So what is productivity? Well, productivity is something which you're always going to be connected to. It doesn't matter whether you are a business, whether you're an individual, whether you're a school kid. It doesn't matter, because you are always connected to productivity. And in our sort of Western culture, productivity is pretty much the it's one of the most important things after money, but the two go hand in hand a lot of the time, so we do tend to fix the two together. But you are measured on your output, you're measured on your contribution to society in terms of usually on how much money you've got, but you are measured on what you can actually achieve, what can actually produce. And I'm doing it now with you, aren't I? I'm yes, okay, I'm producing this with you right now, but we are trying to get you ready to either get ready for an exam, so to produce stuff under a timed, a timed situation, and write a certain amount of things to be able to demonstrate a range of skills in a timed sort of, experience or situation. And then, but also, if you're a business owner, we're expecting you to be able to produce whatever it is, a goods or a service or an experience yourself, to be able to provide that for your customer, and hopefully that's going to translate into revenue or profit and things like that, isn't it? So, in terms of this, we're talking about it from the business's perspective, but you yourself are massively connected to productivity. You can't avoid it. We're always hammering people to try and improve productivity, and to try and increase it and analyze it and have a look at things like that, and that's one of the most important things. Whoops, what am I doing? That's one of the most important things that we have to judge people with, really. So he says productivity measures how productive in terms of output a firm is based on the resource it has. Output refers to the number of units produced. Therefore, the more units produced, the more productive the firm is. So if we were to look at productivity for a teacher, they would probably look at how many students we could convert into high grades. They would probably look at something like that, and they do. And look at things like that. When I look at my students and look at their productivity, if it was a BTEC student, I'd be looking at assignments and how much, and what kind of quality of assignments they can produce, and in what speed can they do that at. But in an A-level class, I'd be looking at what kind of exam sort of questions they can output and things like that. So we are actively using these things. We are actively always connected to it. The more productive a firm is, the more output it will have to sell, because remember, the more we can produce, the more we have to physically sell. The more units we sell will mean more revenue, and they are capable. The more revenue we're capable of achieving. And although it must be remembered that there needs to be demand for the output to turn into revenue. So important thing to remember is it doesn't matter how much you do if you've not got the demand for it. And remember about demand, what did we say about demand? We said it was people who are willing and able to purchase that product, wasn't it? That's why Ferrari doesn't have unlimited demand, because in fact they only have a very small demand, really, don't they? Because of how luxurious, how specialist, how expensive their cars are. So the thing here is, it doesn't matter how much we can output, does it? It doesn't matter if you could essentially get, let's say you were doing a BTEC, right? It doesn't really matter if you are able to get, write an assignment that's long enough to get 3 distinctions when you get capped out of the first distinction. So as soon as you've got the bare minimum, then this productivity thing kind of forces you down the road of stop then, because you never outpace what your demand is. So whether the demand is someone asking for that off you, whether it's an exam question and you could write for pages and pages, but it's only 8 marks, stop writing at 8 marks, because ultimately you haven't got the demand, have you? I know it's a different way of thinking about it, but it's important not to outpace your sort of writing, your production. You've got to make sure it's linked to demand all the time. Only ever write as much as you need to. So why measure productivity? Well, it's a measure of the performance. It's a measure of performance of business, and it's hard to do. Remember, we struggle measuring performance in terms of that. We can look at profit levels, we can look at revenue levels and things like that. But a lot of the time, we are looking at measuring the performance of. We're looking for ways to measure performance, aren't we? And this isn't a bad way of doing it. It measures how efficient the workforce is. This is called labour productivity. So we're looking at how good the labour that we have is at converting our raw materials into finished products. How efficient they are at doing that. It measures how efficient its capital. Remember, when we're talking about capital-intensive things, we're talking about machinery. Capital is also in terms of money, isn't it? In terms of cash. But in this respect, we're talking about things which are heavily capital-intensive in terms of it take a lot of money to invest in. That's machinery. It's producing output. So how good is that machine at producing stuff? How efficient is it? Can we identify improvements if they can or if they need to be made as well? So there's a couple of different things, the reasons why we use it. But the main reason is we set goals. We use this to have a look at whether the productivity is there, whether we're actually meeting the goals and things like that. But also looking at improvements and whether we can actually continue to improve. Because remember, we don't want to sit on our laurels. We don't want to remain stationary and think, oh well, we've done enough. If your market isn't growing, then it's shrinking, isn't it? Because someone else is going to be taking your market share. Now, labour productivity first. Okay, labour productivity is a measurement of the efficiency in which a firm's labour force generates output over a given period of time. E.g., it measures the output per worker over a given time period. So what we're actually saying is how much output is any individual worker or any series of workers or collection of workers, how good are they at changing raw materials into finished items. So that's how productive they are. Okay. Now, in this one, it says we must specifically say efficiency. So when we're talking about our definitions, when you're doing your definitions in your exam, because remember, a good exam technique is to always put a definition at the start of our question, especially the longer ones. But it must be about efficiency. We've got to use the words. So don't forget to try and use your business terminology. It's really, really important that you don't forget to do that, because lots of people go into exams, they do know the stuff, but then they end up talking about, they talk around it rather than just using the word efficiencies and things like that. And it must specifically refer to over a period of time as well. Okay, so they're looking for quite specific things when they're talking about this. It's quite simple to get marks over, in terms of definitions, but you've got to be specific. You've got to know your stuff. You can't just sort of like wishy-washy all over it. All right. Let's have a look at the formula. So if you notice, it's the same formula that comes up again and again, and we use it for a couple of different ones in this one. So here, we've got labour productivity, output over a period of time, over number of employees per period. So output over number of employees. It's very simple. How many glasses can we make? If I say, okay, what's the labour productivity on glasses over the last week? All right. So then you'd say, okay, well, output, we've made 1,000 glasses, and how many employees have we had over the last week? We've had 100 employees. So that would mean that we get our thing. So we've got 1,000 glasses, 100 employees. So that must mean that each employee made 100 glasses each. Yeah? Does it make sense? So very, very simple. Don't overcomplicate it. You've got some questions to be able to have a look at, in the book that goes with this and things like that. So feel free, but it's really, really simple. Just what is the output? Divide that up by the number of people doing it. Okay? So, sorry, I can just hear a weird noise in the background. Sorry, it sounded like water in the background, but it isn't. Apparently, it's a sewing machine, so it's fine. I just needed to make sure. I was like, why does it sound like there's water flying up walls? Anyway, so problems with labour productivity. Okay, so it's a very simple way of doing it, isn't it? We've got our glasses, we've got our how many glasses, and we can figure out how good our employees are changing our raw material, our glass in this respect, to the glasses, and we can say, okay, 1,000 glasses, we've got 100 people doing it, so therefore they're all making 100 each, which is good. But as I said, so we got that. It's quite a basic thing, but there are issues with that, isn't it? So first of all, which employees should be counted? All right. If we talked about the people who are directly involved with the physical production of a product like this, it's not that difficult. But what about people who are part-time workers? What about people who are only coming in? What if you've got a split shift pattern where it's not, you don't complete one product per person, you complete part of a product, you complete, some people just put this design on the front, some people make it green, some people, so it's difficult, isn't it? Because we can't really talk about finished products if different employees do different things, and realistically, they are going to do different things, aren't they? It's unlikely that you're going to have a production schedule, you're going to have a production method that completely completes an individual product with one person. I'm not saying it can't happen, and there are products that do that, but the more complicated that the product gets, the less likely you are going to have individuals creating products, are you? You're going to get a range of people completing different sections of it, and especially that comes down to our methods of production as well, isn't it? If you remember back to us talking about them earlier on in the year and things like that. So should employees on long-term sickness be included as well? Because this will dramatically decrease your productivity, won't it? It is something that we need to think about. It is something that needs to be taken into account, but is this really going to help? So if we say, well, actually, it's not 100, it's 110, because we had 5 part-time workers involved, and we had 5 people who are off on long-term sick. So it's actually, the productivity isn't 100, it's more like 94.6 or something like that. But so that really though, is that actually a true reflection of the productivity? Are we not happy with the productivity that we're doing? Are we not happy with the output that we're producing? It's a hard one. So essentially, you've got to make these decisions, and this is a decision that you can make as a business. Some businesses will deal with this differently, but sometimes you've just got to say, well, we know it's not going to be an absolute science, this. We know it's not going to be absolutely perfect, so we're going to remove certain bits of data from it. So how can we improve it? Well, if we want to improve our labour productivity, remember it's only the productivity of our people at the moment in time, is reduce absenteeism. Remember, absenteeism is the amount of people who are off. They could be off because they were ill. They could be off because they can't get in. Whatever it is, it's snowing and they can't get into the workplace. Whatever. All right, but if we can reduce that by, and there's a range of ways that we could reduce it, isn't it? By everything from making the place better to work, making it more, satisfying the needs, the wants, the motivation factors that person will need. Maybe they're not coming in because they're getting drunk on a Friday night and they have to work on a Saturday morning, and it's because they don't really care about the work, or it could be because they have a drink problem and they haven't got the support, or it could, or they haven't got a car because they haven't got enough money, so we could pay them slightly more, or we could provide transport, or whatever it is. All right. Increasing motivation is a really, really important thing that we need to remember about absenteeism. But in sort of production jobs, if you're doing very, very low skill, low wage labour, jobs, so that you're actually producing the same thing again and again and again, then they're the jobs that people don't want. They're the jobs that people, when people talk about boring jobs, that's the ones that they're referring to, and the ones that people are trying to get out of. I think people misunderstand the purpose of education in that. I should do a video on the purpose of education and talk about that for a second, because I think still people completely misunderstand what it's for. In my eyes, I just see it as a currency to buy a better job. That's what education is for me. It is simultaneously more important for other things, but in this society that we live in, it's very much a currency. It can be bought, access to it. Intelligence can't be bought, but education can, and people don't understand the relevance of that or the importance of that sometimes, and they end up shooting themselves in the foot. But anyway, let's not get too sidelined. That's probably time for another video. Multi-skilled workers. Now, this is another one that we talked about in terms of job enrichment or job enlargement. Enlargement in this respect of making your job bigger, making your job access to more stuff, giving you more skills. Because if we have multi-skilled workers, that means if someone's off, then we can replace them. Yeah. So the problem would be doing that, like the reason that a lot of the schools and colleges closed because of this coronavirus, it wasn't because of, the government's massive altruistic motives and trying to, save us all and things like that. It wasn't to do with that. It was to do with the fact that they couldn't physically meet the demand, that they didn't have enough employees to do it. So if we're in a situation where we, you need a business teacher, you can't just get a maths teacher to do it because they don't know anything about business. And they might be able to basically plod along, just the same as I might be able to basically plod along, do a maths lesson. But when you've got individual specific employees doing specific jobs, makes it quite hard to move them around, and especially in production, because you're going to have you could damage the product, you could make it so it's not safe, whatever it is that you need to do. But if we multi-skill them, we can kind of pull people out and things like that. So if we didn't have just business teachers and we just didn't have maths teachers, but we had teachers who taught a range of subjects, then it would have made it easier to pop people out and move people around and things like that. So that would help with absenteeism as well, isn't it? It makes it less impactful on the business. Technological improvements. Remember, we can make it easier for people. We went to Jaguar Land Rover on a little trip a while ago now, and one of the things they were doing, which was brilliant, was when instead of carrying tires and big pieces of machinery, they had this kind of like hydraulic press thing where they sort of pushed it into the very sort of heavy bit of machinery, and it made it dead light, so they could just literally lift it like superhuman strength and just pop it in. And it didn't mean them. It made the less physically demanding job, which means that they're less likely to get hurt, less likely to be absent, and it made them more efficient as well. Change working hours or shifts. Could we make it easier? Could we make it more flexible for people? Could we make it so that people would be more likely to work for us or more likely to be consistent and things like that? What about in terms of trying to get there on the bus? It might not fit in with the things like that. And cut the number of workers but keep the output the same. So if we can do that, and that happens a lot. I've spoken to a lot of students who they say, yeah, that happened to us. And because it's the first time they've experienced this, where businesses make people redundant to try and make an efficiency saving. So they will get rid of a load of people and then they'll expect you to do their job. And it's not really fair, but ultimately the problem is, especially when you're good at your job, you rise to the occasion and you try and do the good job and you try and fix this problem and you try and maintain that productivity and things like that, because ultimately you've still got your own targets to hit. So they rely on that sometimes. They rely on the fact that people do want to do a good job and they kind of put the pressure on you to do that. What about capital productivity then? So when we talk about capital productivity, rather than labour, we're talking about what about how much money is our money making for us, basically. So how hard are we making our money, our investment work for us? So a business may be interested in the productivity of its capital. Now, in terms of this, when we're talking about how much are we making our money work for us, you've got to remember that when we're talking about capital intensive stuff, we're investing a hell of a lot of money into machinery. So when we talk about capital productivity, there's two different ways of seeing it, really. In this respect, we're talking about machinery, but you can also refer to capital productivity as things like return on capital employed and things like that, which we'll talk about a different point. But this one we're talking about, if you've got something that's capital intensive, so machinery, how good is the machinery, how productive is that machinery about doing things as well? So a business may be interested in the productivity of its capital. This is becoming increasingly likely as more and more firms become capital intensive. Remember, more machinery based, more automation, more machines doing things. And we're probably going to do this more and more, aren't we? Capital intensive is where there is a greater proportion of capital, e.g. machinery, technology, than labour. It can be expressed per machine. All right. So, capital productivity measures the level of output compared to the capital employed, usually machinery, all right, in the business. Don't get confused between the words capital and capital when we're talking about money. So it is the same. Like I said, capital employed is money, but we're talking about it in terms of machinery because that's the only way that we can really describe it in terms of we're spending money instead of physical labour. So it's the measure of how efficient the capital employed is in the business at generating output. So how much are you making your money work for you? How much is your machinery able to output for you? So what do? Well, we have a look at the formula. The formula is exactly the same as the other one, so that's good, isn't it? You don't even have to remember that many formulas. So our output over our period of time, over our capital employed or our number of machines. Just the same as if you remember before, it was our output over the amount of people. So if a factory employed 10 showing machines and the total number of garments sewn in the day was 900, the capital productivity would be 90 garments per machine per day. All right. You've got some questions in your book that you can have a go at, but it's dead simple. I could throw up anything here. If we take it back to this, it's exactly the same. How many cups did the machine make? We have 1,000 machines. We have 10,000 cups. How many did it make? So 1,000 machines, 10,000 cups. What is that? 100 each. 10,000 cups. I'm not even thinking straight here. I can't even think. Let's make it really, really simple. We have 10 people. We have 10 cups. We have 10 machines. We have 10 cups. They make a cup each, don't they? Yeah. One thing that we do get people messing up in the exam for is they don't put per machine per day, and it's really important that, because we're talking about capital productivity or labor productivity per person or per machine, or so don't forget to put that at the end of your exam question. So when you've said 90 garments, first of all, don't forget to say garments, because a lot of people don't actually tell you what it is. They just put 90 what. So 90 garments per machine per day, and you'll get your your ideal exam answer there. They can be mean, and they can actually dock marks for that, or rather just not award the marks. So they won't take marks off you, but they will not award them. The more marks you can get for this, the more likely they are to take marks off you, or rather not award them if you don't do that. So just get into the habit of it. When you're talking about things, we're not talking about 90. We're talking about 90 cups. We're talking about 90 iPads. We're talking about 90, whatever. All right. So what can we do to improve our capital productivity? Well, we can invest in new, more efficient machinery, can't we? Regular servicing, careful usage, longer operational hours. And this careful usage is something that you'd be surprised how much this is part of it. It's about not being wasteful. It's about turning lights off. It's about turning the machine off when it's not in use. It's about trying to use it in the most efficient ways that we can possibly can. So, for example, would it be better to wait until we've got a big backlog of these and do them all at once? At least we wouldn't have to keep turning the machine on and off, because it might cost us more energy and therefore become less efficient, because our cost of use would go up. Than just putting it on once and letting them drill through all the different ones. So it might be better to let it back up, the actual production back up a little bit, depending on if it's going to have repercussions on the rest of the production line or something like that. But you can make that decision at the time. Regular servicing, making sure that it doesn't break down. We know that when we were at Jaguar Land Rover, we were talking to them about that, and they said that they have a really what we call just-in-time production, which means that they only get the actual stuff to make the product at the last minute. So if they need tyres, they don't have tyres ready for a Range Rover. They have tyres for the Range Rover literally 5 minutes before, an hour before the actual production needs to take place. So that means that if there is a delay on the delivery of that product, then it cocks the whole thing up. The whole thing's a mess. And what they do to make sure that they minimise that is they actually fine the couriers, they fine the delivery experts to if they don't provide it. So they've got a vested interest in providing it as well. So their contract says that if they don't provide it, that they will be fined. All right, and the reason they do that is because it's just they need to make sure that the delivery people actually understand the significance of the situation and don't underestimate the impact that little bit of delivery delay would have on the overall business. Okay, so yeah, make sure it doesn't go down as well. Service things regularly. Make sure that they don't things. It's a sensible thing to do with like your car, isn't it? In terms of if you want to improve your sort of capital productivity, if you want to improve the productivity of your car, you could invest in a new car, couldn't you? You can invest in a better car, get you from A to B better, more efficient. Regular servicing, make sure that your car's fine, make sure that it's good to go. Careful usage, don't rag the car around. If you want to be sensible about it, try not to use the car that much, but also drive sensibly, use it sensibly. Don't be putting your foot down. And longer operational hours as well, if we can get the more out of the use of it. Because remember, if we've got a fixed cost of a certain amount of energy use here, and it's say it costs us £100,000 to have this machine on for 2 hours, then we need to make the most of those 2 hours, don't we? So in which case, if we don't want to be turning it off. We want to use the whole of it, ideally. So, we make sure that we're using it to the most we get, the most productivity we can physically get out of it. All right. So, how might productivity affect the different stakeholders? Now, you've got a little table in your book, but let's have a little think about these just a second. So, we've got the different ones, haven't we? So, how would it affect the different stakeholders? So, let's have a think. So, let's start with customers. How would productivity affect the different stakeholders? Well, productivity is going to be directly affected to do with cost. So if it's directly affected with cost, then it's going to affect our profit margin. If it affects our profit margin, then it might affect our price, and therefore we might have to put our price up. So if our productivity is less, then that means that we're going to have less profit margin to play with. That means that we're going to have to affect that price to be able to maintain a decent profit margin, isn't it? So it might positively affect them that if our productivity is increased, we might be able to pass on those productivity savings, those efficiency savings to our customers. It's unlikely. We probably won't. We probably just put them in our back pocket and give them as dividends and things like that. But potentially we could. If the productivity goes down, though, we're going to have to worry about the fact that we're going to have to put the price up technically, or we're going to have to swallow that profit loss, essentially, aren't we? So we've got to think about that as well. So issues with that. What about the owners? Well, the owners and the shareholders in this respect, like we said, so if productivity is high, then we're going to have hopefully more output, and if we've got the demand for it, then we're going to potentially see more sales and more profit. That means that we can, take more drawings as our owners. We make more profit ourselves, but we also are able to give better dividends to our shareholders, obviously depending on the type of business, remember. Now, the reason I say depending on is because we talk about that, don't we? The significance to the situation, the AO 4 points. Is it more important for a small business, a big business, a newly fledgling business, or whatever it is? So don't forget to keep saying, yeah, but that's assuming. Don't forget to do that, because if you can do that, then that means you can confidently, explain yourself, which is good. What about other ones? Well, government, the more productivity is, hopefully the more successful the business will be. That's going to sort of generate more tax, more stability of jobs, which is what the government wants. Your employees, if they are more productive, hopefully they'll feel more motivated, which will be happier, which means that they're more likely to reduce absenteeism for you, but it's also likely to reduce things like mental health issues, things like that. Multi-skilling people and stuff like that sometimes helps. But it's also going to make it more enjoyable. It's hopefully going to make them feel like more secure. If they can see the business doing better, then they're going to feel more secure, have that job security, make a good wage and things like that. You can provide for people. So can you see how it works? I'm just running through them. You feel free. As I said, you've got the rest of the table. Can complete the rest. But you've got to keep remembering all the time, always apply it to your stakeholders, because that's the one thing that we know is definitely going to be in that final exam. There is going to be, a question specifically on stakeholders, and you need to be ready. Advantages of high productivity. Seems pretty obvious, but let's have a look. So increase economies of scale. Remember, it's not just pricing economies of scale. It's not just buying economies of scale we need to think about. It's in terms of managerial economies of scale. We've got things like, technological economies of scale and things like that. So getting the best technology, being able to do things, managing, having specialized managers and things like that. So there's a range of them. Don't just say pricing. Don't just say, purchasing economies of scale, because people get into that frame of mind of thinking, oh, it's just because we're buying stuff in bulk. Yeah, bulk buying is economies of scale, but it's one specific part of that, which is purchasing. There's a range of them, internal and external. Increased competitiveness, really, really, really important. Can't really avoid this coming into our mind of trying to be competitive, trying to get that competitive advantage over other people, trying to be able to compete on on every sort of bit in the market. Spreading the fixed costs over higher output. That's good, isn't it? So if we know our fixed costs, it doesn't change, but we divvy them up, don't we? In terms of, especially for contribution, we divvy up the amount of fixed cost per unit to try and figure out how much money that we're going to have and how much we can pay of our fixed costs. Well, if we have more output, if we add 10,000 cups to pay our rent with rather than 1,000 cups, it means that we're more likely, the contribution is going to be increased, isn't it? So we're going to have more money to be able to contribute to paying those fixed costs. Hopefully pay those fixed costs off faster. If we pay the fixed costs and the variable costs off faster, then we're getting straight into profit quicker, aren't we? Lower unit costs, just in generally, because of those purchasing economies of scale or things like that, or it could just be the fact that we're managing to to be more efficient, to be able to use our stuff more efficiently, to be able to divvy up our fixed cost over things more effectively, means that we can do it. Performance bonuses to workforce, we can provide them with a range of things, can't we? Hopefully that'll improve motivation. That not always, and if you remember, we haven't talked about it on stream yet, but motivation is a really important thing. Remember, it's not just all about money, is it? Motivation can come from money, but it's one of the lowest ebbs of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And once you've satisfied that need for money, although in Western culture we spend a lot of time chasing money, people live to the means, don't they? If you had less money, you would just live to a less of a degree of standard. You just wouldn't have a MacBook or a expensive telly or a detached house or a car or whatever it is that you're doing. You'd have a smaller house or live in a tent or whatever it is. Not ideal, but you probably would. So let's have a little look at capacity utilization now. So we're nearly there. We're making some good time here. So we've got capacity utilization. We've talked about labor productivity, haven't we? We've talked about capital productivity. If you remember, labor productivity is all about the productivity of people, and capital productivity is all about how much you make how good your machinery is, how good your money is at making money, essentially. Capacity utilization, then, therefore, is measured using the following formula. So we've got our current output over our maximum output times 100. So what are we doing over what could we be doing times 100, and that'll give you your capacity utilization. And I think you will be surprised how much you see capacity utilization in the news and that. I was reading on BBC News a while ago, they were talking about the fact that capacity was down to like 40% just before the schools closed. I know I'm talking about this a lot today. I don't know why it's on my mind, but they said that the capacity was really, really low because people weren't in, students weren't in, staff wasn't in, and that wasn't just teaching staff, that was, catering staff, that was all these different people that were, massively affected by things. So you can see the effects of it when they have to start closing stuff down because they just don't have the ability to meet demand, essentially. And people need to be willing and able to be able to do the job, and willing and able to be able to come to college and things like that, don't they? And at that time, they weren't willing or able. Some people in different ones. So we figure this out. Current output over maximum output times 100. That shows us how much we are doing out of what we could be doing. All right. And you can do this with your time, really. How much time are you working on your project? How much time are you in the gym? How much time are you thinking? Depending on if you're trying to achieve something, you can look at your capacity utilization and move some stuff around. Have you ever been in a situation where you really struggle with, it just gets on top of you and you're doing too much? It'll be your capacity utilization. It'll be because you're mismanaging your capacity utilization. You'll think you're busier than you are. You probably are able to cope with the workload. It's just that you are not structured enough in the way that you're doing things. And you need to have a look at your capacity utilization. So how many hours are available and how many hours are you actually putting into this thing? And what's the quality of it? That's one thing that it doesn't talk about capacity utilization, is the quality of the output as well. You might be in the gym for 5 hours, but it doesn't mean that you're actually, massively efficient in 5 hours. It means that it might take you 5 hours to do a 1 hour a 1 hour workout. You see people in the gym, don't you? You see people doing, sat round on the phones or having a chat, and you think, well, why have you come here? So you just come to sit on a rowing machine. It doesn't mean that you're actually losing weight. Just because you're in there for 5 hours doesn't mean you're necessarily doing it. But anyway, let's have a look, think about it for this side. So the amount of firm that can make is determined by the quantity of capital assets, so building machinery and labour. So basically, how do we determine how much stuff we can make? Well, we have a look at what are our machinery capabilities, what are our labour capabilities, and we put them together. When a firm is making full use of all these resources, this is known as maximum output, and the firm is said to be working at full capacity or 100% capacity utilisation. The word utilisation means we are utilising the capacity. We're effectively using the capacity. We are making use of it. All right. The production ideal is a capacity utilisation of around 90%. Now, why is that, do you think? Why is it that production shouldn't be more than 90%? Because if we are doing capacity utilisation, surely they're close to 100%. If we can get 100% capacity utilisation, then that would be fantastic, wouldn't it? So why is it then that we want 90%? Well, it's quite simple, and the idea is that we've got to have a bit of wiggle room, basically, and we want to have a little bit of room just in case any external factors or any internal factors for these, but any factors change that require us to change ourselves and to change our output. So absenteeism is going to be something that we're going to do. We have to accept that. If we're running at 100% capacity utilization, that means if there is any change in the external environment, any change in the internal environment, any changes in absenteeism, any changes, all of that, then we are going to have a massive impact on our output, aren't we? Because we haven't got any wiggle room. We've no room to have anything go wrong. So if we have 90%, we've got 10% there that we can either increase if we need to. So if we get a special order, we might be able to do that. I mean, look at the situation at the minute. If we have a global pandemic and we need to change our output so that we're producing masks and things like that for people, then if we're working 100% on something else, then we've not got the capacity to do that. But if we've got a little bit of capacity, you might be able to say, well, you know what? We don't actually have to put our own production at risk here. We can do that because we've got 10% 10% production capability that we're not actually using, are we? So, sometimes the year as well, this will go up, sometimes it will go down, depending on the seasonality of the product and things like that, the product production. But ideally, we want to get it around 90. So if you can talk about that in your exam, that'd be ideal. So fixed costs and capacity, quantitative and qualitative questions and answers. So let's have a look. So it says, fixed costs do not change as output changes. Yeah, we know that, don't we? If a firm's maximum capacity is 100 units and its fixed costs are £200, what is the proportion of fixed costs that need to be absorbed by each unit? All right, so what have we got? So 100 units and the fixed cost are £200. So what is the proportion of fixed costs that need to be absorbed by each unit? Well, this one, so if there's 100 things, 200 units. Would it be 4%? 5%? 5%? 5%. Yeah, I think it's 5%. 5% of fixed costs. I can't see my live chat here to ask if you agree or disagree, unfortunately, because it says cannot connect. But yeah, I think it's that. Is that I do these? I'm doing these off the cuff, by the way. I don't. I'm just doing these with you to. I think that's important though, to show that this is why I want to put myself in the same position as you, essentially, and try and do these off the cuff. So I think it's 5% because £200, 100 units. What is the proportion? So they'd have 20, 40. Yeah. If a firm's maximum capacity is 100 units and fixed costs are 200, what is the proportion of fixed costs? See, it's too early for me. I'm not good at maths. I'd rather just talk about stuff rather than actually do it. So I think it's 5%. If it's not, please correct me. If output reached 50 units, what would the new quantity of our things? It would be double, wouldn't it? That would need to be absorbed. It would. What is the new quantity? Because we're talking about quantity as well. The first one's talking about proportion, the next one's talking about quantity. Considering the advances above, what is the best possible capacity utilisation level from a quantitative perspective? And when we're saying quantitative perspective, remember that's not the qualitative perspective. Quantitative perspective is talking about what would be the best way of doing it. So if you were looking for that 90%, they're wanting you to have a look at the numbers and tell us what the 90% would be. Now for the qualitative argument, what are the risks of constantly running at 100% capacity utilisation? We've already talked about it a little bit, haven't we? So apologies for not being absolutely on it with my numbers today, but I don't want to sit around here while I work out numbers. But yeah, so have a little look at it anyway. You see the premise, don't you, of how it works. So, how firms get towards full capacity. So, if a firm's capacity utilisation is unsatisfactory, there are two possible approaches to improve it. Increase your demand or cut capacity. All right? Now, if we can increase demand, remember the people who are willing and able to purchase the product, then we will be able to get better capacity utilisation because we don't need to make more or anything like that. We can justify the production, basically, can't we? Which is better. We can also cut capacity, so we could do what we call rationalisation or retrenchment if it goes more extreme. We can cut the capacity if we don't need it. Rationalisation is where we stop certain bits of the business if we aren't using them at the time. So a key factor in deciding whether or not to cut capacity or increase demand is the underlying cause of the low utilisation. So in this case, is it the demand which is the issue, or is it the capacity which is the issue? If it is the capacity, then we can maybe increase it. We could do a recruitment drive. We could make ourselves more efficient. We could give it, we could provide them with better machinery or whatever it is that's just stopping that efficiency. Or if it's demand, then we could do a marketing campaign and try and drum up that, can't we? But we've got to have a look at that and basically decide which one are we going to go down. Are we going to cut it or increase the other one? All right. So advantages and disadvantages, like we always like to talk about these, don't we? Fixed costs are spread as widely as possible. Assets are being used as fully as possible, thus potentially high profits. The firm appears to be successful. Workers feel safe, creating motivation and things like that. Some disadvantages of high capacity utilization, though, is lack of flexibility. We know that we won't be able to change our production very much. We won't be able to do, one-off things. We won't be able to move with seasonality and things like that because we've already got too high. Our capacity utilization is too high. Possible fall in quality, yeah, potentially. If we're running at full pelt, there's no room for anything, then that means that we're, even if there was an issue that crops up, we're likely to not change it because we're not going to be able to cope with the demand. Massive pressure on staff, yeah, we'll know from this, won't we? There is going to be an increased pressure on staff and more breakdown and machine failures because we're not being able to service them. We're not going to be able to take them offline because we're using them all the time. So, last thing I want to talk to you about, last little bit now, is problems of spare capacity. So what's the other side? We always talk about the positives of these things and, why we should have high capacity utilization and having, our capacity used up and things like that. What could we benefit from? Well, we could benefit from the fact that we have more sales, or rather not more sales, but we can satisfy more demand in the market because we've got the ability to produce more effectively. But what about spare capacity? Well, if you've got spare capacity, then we've got a demotivation of staff, haven't we? So no overtime or the threat of redundancies. Now, in terms of redundancies, Oops. I'm sure that's how you spell redundancies. Because that would be redundancy on something, wouldn't it? Or redundancy is, rather than redundancies. Just saying. And then we've got... we know they're the main things that we know that the security of jobs are one of the things which our stakeholders as employees really need. So that's going to be something that they're going to be bothered about, isn't it? That threat and redundancy and things like that. And no overtime, no potential to make more money. We might see people jumping out and things like that. And we've also got increased costs. Why? Because we are unable to spread our cost over more and more places. Instead, we're having to do it over less and less because we've got all this spare capacity. We're not actually able to do it. Now, reduced profits and lack of return on investments is a big one as well with this. Now, the main thing I draw your attention to here is this happens a lot. You'd be surprised at how often this happens. And there are a range of different ways that businesses can get round having lots of spare capacity. But one of the most innovative ways that I thought was sell some space or rent some space out. So, for example, B&Q, a massive company, and you know how I feel about B&Q in terms of capacity utilization. I think it's absolutely insane what they do, the amount of products that they keep out, that there is no need to have so much stock. That's insane. If you look at them versus Screwfix, yes, okay, B&Q might be able to charge a premium because of the convenience aspect, but Screwfix, I think, in the long run is going to be a more successful business because they're being more conservative about the way that they are with the stock control. They're able to order things for you like next day and things like that. Well, that's more effective. Having a good delivery system and a good efficient system like that is much more important than having a piece of wood to hand right this second that you're willing to pay 3 times as much for. So what did B&Q do? Because they had all this spare capacity, they had this space that they weren't using in the stores. They rented some of it to supermarkets. So I think it's a brilliant idea. Why not have? They call them hypermarkets in foreign countries, don't they? Where they have big supermarkets with other shops involved. Why not? If you've got a bit of space, what are supermarkets doing with their capacity? Well, they're renting them out or selling them to other places, aren't they? Argos. There's an education one, isn't there? There's hairdressers. There's all sorts of post offices. And they're saying, well, look, we've got this space here. We already heat it. We already light it. We already insure it. We already have security. Why not just rent it out to someone else? And it's better for everyone in that regard, isn't it? It's better for everyone involved. So that's a nice way of doing it. You can potentially do it, and also sort of try and get around that spare capacity sort of idea. It won't be doable for everyone, but it is something that we need to think about. Okay. So, can you evaluate the impact of capacity utilization, either high or low, on the various stakeholders? I'll leave you to do that. There's no need for me to go through it again, I think, because we've already talked about stakeholders today. I just want to have a little look at an assessment. Okay, let's have a quick look. So, Johnson's pallets. We've got this in the book, so as I said, I'm not going to go through it in loads of detail, but I am going to have a quick look at it with you, just so that we can clarify what we'd need to do. So actual current output is 240,000 units. We've got max output of 400,000 units, variable cost of £6 per unit, fixed cost of £360,000 per unit, selling price of £14 per unit. So let's just do a quick couple of calculations to figure out. So what can we actually figure out here? Well, we can figure out our current revenue. We can also figure out, well, how do we do that? Well, we get our selling price, £14 per unit, and times it by the 240,000 units. That will give us our current revenue. If we want our maximum revenue, we can do 14 times 400,000. That will give us our maximum revenue. If we want our variable cost, we can look at our variable cost right now. Our total variable cost at 240,000 units by doing £6 times the 240,000, or we can have a look at our max output by doing our £6 times our £400,000. So yeah, and the fixed cost is not going to change. That's going to be $360,000 all the time, isn't it? So work out total fixed costs. Well, total fixed costs are already given to you, so you don't need to. So work out total fixed costs. What do you mean work it out? It's already there, 360,000, because it doesn't change with output. All right. They might try and trick you in the exam by doing sneaky things like that. Work out total variable costs. Okay, well, total variable costs on here, we'd have to be saying, well, do you want you in this regard? I think you go with your current output, because there's no point of looking at your maximum output, is there? So work out total variable costs. We'd be doing our £6 times 240,000 units. Just whip out the old calculator. Where are we? Okay, so we've got 6 times 240,000, 1.44 million I've got in terms of... sorry, no, I've done that wrong, haven't I? Oh, is that right? No, so total variable cost, yeah, £6 times 240,000 units. So I've got, 1.44 million. For that, so in terms of how much it's costed us, fixed cost, we've got 360,000 there. Work out total costs, so we can add them up, can't we? So we've got our 1.44 million plus our 360,000. That gives us 1.8 million. And work out profit. Well, we've got our 1.8 million, so keep 1.8 million in your mind, and then we'll do 14 times output 240,000 is 3.36 million minus 1.8. 1,560,000 I got from that total profit. Yeah, happy with that. Show formula, show your workings out, and give your answer clearly. All right, so don't overthink it. Just make it really simple for yourself, because it's really not as difficult as it might seem. And definitely not as hard as I make out during this. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to hold it there, because there is no need for us to do much more. There is loads more stuff in your book. You can have a little look at it. There's a couple of questions to do. There's more, evaluation you can do and things like that. But it is time, ladies and gents, for the news roundup. So we're going to have a little look on this auspicious day. Here we are. There he is. Good old, our master. There he is. Let's have a look at him. What's he saying? They always get really terrible pictures of Boris Johnson. Have you noticed that? The UK is at moments of maximum risk of the coronavirus outbreak, Boris Johnson has said. He's urged people not to lose patience with the lockdown. This is a good point, and I think that he is saying what I believe as well in this regard, is people are getting bored of it. People are doing stupid things. People are having barbecues and just going round to people's houses and just ignoring the fact that people are dying a lot and saying, oh yeah, let's open this thing. I don't think people are really looking at the situation in too much depth here, aren't they? He says, speaking outside Number 10 for the first time since recovering from the virus, he says that we are now beginning to turn the tide, but he said he refused to throw away the public's effort and sacrifice and relax the lockdown too soon. The PM returned to work on Sunday after more than 3 weeks off sick. He apologised for being away from his desk for much longer than I would have liked and thanked his colleagues who stood in for him. This is the point, isn't it? This is the point. But ending it too soon could lead to a second spike. I ask you to contain your impatience. Real signs now that we're passing through the peak. And comparing the outbreak to someone being attacked, he said, if this virus were a physical assailant, an unexpected and invisible mugger, which I can tell you from personal experience it is, then this will be the moment when we have begun together to wrestle it to the floor. And so it follows the moment of opportunity, and the moment when we can press home our advantage is the moment of maximum risk. I know many people are looking at our apparent success and beginning to wonder whether it is now the time to go easy on those social distancing measures. It's not. This is insane. Please don't do it. It's crazy, isn't it? A coronavirus tattoo for every day of lockdown? Goodness me. Steady on, mate. Right. Let's have a look at some business news anyway. I just thought I thought we'd talk about our Lord and Master because there he is. Okay. Some high street names won't be back. We've talked about these over the last couple of weeks, haven't we? So, some high street shops will not survive the coronavirus lockdown. The chairman of the retail chain, Timpson, has warned Sir John Timpson, and high street shops would look somewhat different after restrictions were eased. The key cutting firm, who also owns Snappy Snaps, and Johnson's Dry Cleaners will reopen 40 of its outlets this week. Sir John told the BBC's Today programme there are going to be some other names that don't come back. UK shops deemed non-essential have been shut since the government imposed strict measures on the 23rd of March, but the country is set to fall into a deep recession after large parts of the economy shut down. So Timpson, which has over 2,155 shops, says staff will return to outlet-based in supermarkets, which are classified as essential retailers, along with a handful of the group's high street dry cleaning stores. Sir John, whose family founded a 155-year-old business, said the most important part of this is to get the safety right. Yeah, I agree, and it is an issue. There will be significant amounts of companies that don't make it through here. Most employers are very sensible people. They know what to do, and clearly their employees are the priority. I don't know about that, but hey, what they talk about there? What's it talking about? Beyond the retail sector, house builder Redrow also announced on Monday that it would see a phased return to construction in May. Interesting. Steve Morgan, the firm's founder and former chairman, said this is a real tricky one and health and safety has to come first. However, he dismissed the need for a government-mandated risk assessment before return to work. Most employers... It's a difficult one. Although, can you imagine what we would be like if we were in a different country? Can you imagine what it would be like if we were in a third world country? The privilege that we have, the lottery that we've won to be involved with this. High street shops preparing ways to reopen. Trade figures have issued in social distancing guidelines for shops to prepare in any easing of a lockdown. The British Retail Consortium and USDO's advice includes providing hand sanitizer for customers. Helen Dickinson, the BRC's boss, said the safety and well-being of retail colleagues and customers remains highest priority. They always say that, don't they? Limiting the number of people in store at any one time, encouraging customers to shop alone where possible, scheduling deliveries to avoid crowding, cleaning door handles, lift buttons and handrails regularly, using floor markers to remind customers to maintain a distance of 2 metres. Shops that were deemed non-essential have been shut. This allows trade under lockdown include supermarkets, pharmacies, newsagents, and post offices. It's not going to be a simple answer. And they seem to be saying the same thing again and again, don't they? But I know people are getting bored of it. I know people are getting frightened. But that's just the way it is, isn't it? Firms urge to challenge insurers, try and get on. This could be another thing, isn't it, about businesses, struggling with their external factors, struggling with insurances that they thought were going to be able to satisfy them when it wasn't actually applicable. Airbus. It says the chief executive of Airbus has issued a stark assessment of the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the plane maker. In a letter to workers, he said the company was bleeding cash at an unprecedented speed. The moment the firm announced it was cutting aircraft production by a third. That's significant. It comes as the aviation industry is expected to shrink significantly in the wake of the COVID-19 outbreak. He said that the Airbus 135,000 staff to brace for potentially deep job cuts and warned that its survival was at stake without immediate action. Airbus this week was due to deliver financial results for the first quarter of the year. Those figures will be overshadowed by the pandemic that has left global airlines struggling to survive and almost completely halted the plane deliveries since lockdown started in March. Greg Waldron from aviation industry news website Flight Global highlighted the huge impact on the coronavirus on Airbus and the sector as a whole, saying that every assumption that we made about the industry has been totally upended. The outlook for Airbus has gone from very positive to very negative. There simply is no demand for new aircraft at the moment. In response to the pandemic, Airbus has already begun implementing government-assisted furlough schemes, starting with 3,000 workers in France, and said it would lower output of its narrow-body jets to 40 a month. Airbus has now 13 13,500 workers in the UK, with most of them making wings at its two major sites in Broughton, North Wales, and Filton, Bristol. Despite the major blow to the coronavirus has dealt to Airbus, he said he thinks that they survived the crisis, but not without significant layoffs. This is, as I said, I don't mean to start the week off on a really negative thing here, guys. I'm sorry for being so negative, but I think it's important that we don't skimp on actually looking at what's actually happening in the business news. And I think it is getting worse, isn't it? I think we've seen that. We've seen it over the next couple of months, the last couple of weeks, when we're looking at the news daily about how it's affecting people. And I think it is getting worse. It is. I think the realization is actually hitting people of what this actually means and how it's going to affect people. And there is going to be difficulties. I've spoken to students who are potentially looking at leaving colleges and going for other things, and I think this is just so crazy. Hold on to what you've got, people. Hold on to that fact you've got education. Don't underestimate this situation, because there's going to be a lot of people who have no money, and we know about interest rates. I always talk to my students about the fact that interest rates are so low at the minute that it's not feasible to keep them so low. And that realistically that people will struggle when interest rates increase and houses are going to get taken off people and things like that. But in this regard, I think that this is the important point. You need to double down on the security that you've got. If you've got a job that can give you a bit of security, then you should be, hold your horses. Don't be leaving your job at the minute. If you've got education, if you've got somewhere to hide, if you've got a college course, if you've got a school course, do not be screwing this thing up. It is vitally important that you don't underestimate this, and you don't make a mistake essentially and end up screwing yourself over, because there's going to be a lot of people out of business. There's going to be a lot of people out of jobs. It's not going to be the same world that we had 2 months ago, 3 months ago, 6 months ago. And I think people are still in that sort of frame of mind of, okay, just because I can get a job at a supermarket, I can get a job at this, I can get a job at that. Yeah, but how's it going to be when this whole thing falls over? You can see, as I said, people who are on sponsored degrees and things like that, they've got to worry now, because if they're going to start doing job cuts, they're not going to start offering new jobs. They're going to do a recruitment drive, aren't they? They're going to do I'm going to have to deal with sort of unions arguing about laying people off and employing new people and things like that. And it's going to be difficult. It's going to be a hard one. However, keeping on, people. It's not all doom and gloom. We're coming through it. We are getting there. And you know what? We are a strong economy. We're a strong country, and we can ridiculously get through these situations. We've done it before. We will do it again. I'm sorry that I keep doing this. As I said, hay fever is hitting me quite hard today. I'll go and have an antihistamine and relax for a little while. Okay. Thank you very much for joining me. I will see you all tomorrow at 10. Hopefully with a little bit better news, and Boris Johnson's got a plan to save the world or something like that. But I will see you all tomorrow anyway. Peace.